I never thought my greatest humiliation would come from my own daughter's mouth. "Mom's new boyfriend is twice the man you are," she said at dinner, her words cutting deeper than any knife. But when that perfect man started choking seconds later, everyone froze, except me. As I stood there, ready to save the life of the man who had just replaced me, a dark thought flashed through my mind. What if I just watched him die? What I didn't know then was that this wasn't just about jealousy or a broken family. The driver's license that fell from his pocket that night would lead me down a rabbit hole of false identities, elaborate cons, and a criminal network that had targeted my ex-wife from the beginning. Now I'm in a race against time to expose the truth before this man destroys everything my family has, even if it means my daughter will hate me forever. Follow this channel for the full story of betrayal, redemption, and the lengths a father will go to protect his family, even when they've already rejected him. Like and comment to let me know where you're watching from, and stay tuned for a shocking revelation that will make you question everyone you've ever trusted. I never thought my greatest blow would come from my own daughter's mouth. It was one of those late October evenings in Massachusetts, when the air feels sharp enough to cut through your lungs, and the maple trees outside had turned that deep crimson that always reminded me of blood. I was 58 then, though the mirror had started suggesting 70 after Sarah left me. We were gathered at my ex-wife's Victorian home in Lexington, one of those uncomfortable dinners that feel more like destiny's traps than family gatherings. The kind where the expensive wine doesn't mask the tension thick enough to slice with the sterling silver butter knife resting beside my untouched bread roll. I'd only gone because I wanted to see my daughter, Melissa, even knowing that he would be there. My ex-wife's new boyfriend, sitting at the head of the table as if he already owned the family I'd spent 30 years building. Greg. Even his name irritated me. 45 years old with perfect teeth and a full head of hair that made my balding crown itch with resentment. The way he talked about his investment portfolio with practiced nonchalance. The way his hand rested on Sarah's shoulder, thumb gently stroking the silk blouse I'd bought her for our last anniversary. "So, Dad?" Melissa said, breaking the stilted conversation about property taxes. My heart lifted at her acknowledgement. My little girl, though at 27 she wasn't so little anymore. "How's the apartment?" Before I could answer, Sarah jumped in. "Your father's place is quaint," she said, exchanging a knowing glance with Greg. "Though I imagine it must feel empty after our house. Our house, the one I still made mortgage payments on despite not being allowed to live in it." "It's comfortable," I replied, the lie sticking to my teeth like peanut butter. The truth was that I'd been sleeping on a pull-out couch in a one-bedroom apartment above Gino's Pizzeria for the past 8 months. The constant smell of garlic and cheese had ruined Italian food for me forever. Greg cleared his throat. "I've been meaning to ask, Martin, what exactly are you doing these days? Sarah mentioned you left the accounting firm?" Left. As if I'd walked out voluntarily, rather than being pushed into early retirement during corporate restructuring after 32 loyal years. "I'm consulting," I said simply, another half-truth that tasted like ash. One client in 8 months wasn't exactly a thriving practice. Melissa looked at me with something between pity and disappointment. God, that hurt worse than any physical pain I'd ever experienced. Worse than the minor heart attack last year that no one in this room knew about. "Dad used to be quite good with numbers," she said to Greg, using the past tense as if I were already dead. I stared down at my barely touched salmon, the fish's glazed eye seeming to return my gaze with equal despair. The silence stretched uncomfortably until Sarah mercifully changed the subject. "Greg's taking us to Martha's Vineyard next weekend," she announced, her voice lilting with excitement I hadn't heard in years. "He has a friend with the most gorgeous beachfront property. The Williamsons," Greg added casually. "Senator Williamson's family, known them for years." The name-dropping was so transparent it was almost comical, but Melissa was drinking it up like sweet tea on a summer day. And then it happened. The moment that would change everything. Greg had just finished telling some story about golfing with a minor celebrity when Melissa looked directly at me, her eyes hard in a way I'd never seen before. With her voice firm and loud enough for everyone at the table to hear, she said, "Mom's new boyfriend is twice the man you are." My heart stopped, not because of the attack itself. God knows I'd heard worse during the divorce, but because I saw in her eyes that she truly believed it. I felt as if years of effort, sleepless nights and lonely struggles raising her had dissolved in seconds. The silence at the table was deafening. Greg's barely contained smirk hurt more than any knife. I wanted to remind her who had taught her to ride a bike when she was 6. who had stayed up for 3 straight nights when she had pneumonia at 9, who had worked double shifts to pay for her dance lessons and college tuition, who had shown up to every recital, every graduation, every important moment while sacrificing his own dreams. But the words wouldn't come. My chest felt tight, that familiar pressure building behind my sternum, and it was in that instant, still tasting the bitter rejection, that the unexpected happened. The so-called perfect man began to choke violently. His face turned red, then alarming shades of purple. His hands clutched at his throat, eyes bulging with panic. Everyone froze. Everyone except me. I stood up, my chair scraping loudly against the hardwood floor. While my eyes burned with unshed tears, my hands reacted with the coolness of someone who'd seen death up close. 20 years as a volunteer EMT before the accounting job had made the movements automatic. "He's choking," Sarah screamed, stating the obvious in that helpless way people do when terror takes over. I moved behind Greg, wrapped my arms around his chest, and delivered the first Heimlich thrust. Nothing. His struggles were becoming weaker. I could feel the life beginning to drain from him. Melissa was crying now, her earlier cruelty forgotten in the face of this new horror. "Do something, Dad. Please." The second thrust did nothing. The third might have been my last chance, and in that split second, a dark thought flashed through my mind. Let him go. Let him die. Take back your family. It lasted only a millisecond, but the thought was there, and I would carry the shame of it forever. I delivered the third thrust with everything I had. The piece of salmon shot from his mouth across the table, landing obscenely on the white tablecloth. Greg collapsed forward, gasping desperately for air, alive because of the man he'd helped humiliate minutes earlier. And as I stood there watching everyone rush to comfort him, no one noticed the single tear that escaped down my weathered cheek. I realized then, with absolute clarity, that saving his life would be more painful than letting him die. What I didn't know was that this dinner, this moment, was just the beginning of a twisted path that would lead me to discover who Greg really was, and what it would cost all of us. I knelt beside him, my knees cracking against the hardwood floor, hearing the desperate sound of air trying to escape through his blocked throat. My daughter's screams filled the dining room, piercing and primal, while my ex-wife stood frozen, her manicured hands trembling without knowing what to do. The hands she had once called useless during our last fight. "You can't even fix a leaking faucet, Martin," were now the only ones capable of action. Greg's face was returning from purple to red, and red to a sickly pale as he gasped and sputtered on the floor. Everyone was watching, the dinner forgotten, the expensive salmon now a deadly weapon expelled onto Sarah's pristine tablecloth. With precise movements that my body remembered from years of EMT training, I rolled him onto his side to prevent aspiration. "He's breathing," I announced, my voice steadier than I felt. "Someone call 911 anyway. We need to make sure there's no damage to his throat." Sarah fumbled with her phone, her fingers shaking so badly she could barely dial. I noticed her French manicure was the same shade of red as the wine in our abandoned glasses. Strange, the details you notice in moments of crisis. "Is he going to be okay?" Melissa asked, her voice small and childlike again. Gone was the woman who had eviscerated me minutes earlier. In her place was the little girl who used to climb into my lap during thunderstorms, seeking protection from the monsters in the sky. "He'll be fine," I assured her, though the tightness in my chest reminded me that not everything could be fixed with a well-placed thrust. Some wounds, like the ones inflicted by words, left no visible scars but never truly healed. The room exploded in relief. There were exclamations of joy, embraces exchanged between Sarah and Melissa, prayers of gratitude offered to a God who had apparently worked through my hands. But no one embraced me. No one thanked the instrument of this miracle. My daughter ran to Greg's arms once he was able to sit up, and my ex-wife thanked the Almighty, not me. I remained there, kneeling on the floor like a penitent, taking deep breaths, feeling like an invisible ghost at my own family dinner. "You saved my life," Greg finally croaked, his voice raspy and damaged. His eyes met mine, and for a moment, I thought I saw something strange flash across them. Not gratitude, but calculation. It was gone so quickly, I convinced myself I'd imagined it. "Anyone would have done the same," I replied, the lie bitter on my tongue. Because the truth was, for that millisecond I had considered doing nothing, and that thought would haunt me more than any gratitude ever could. Sarah brought Greg water, her hands still shaking. Small sips, she instructed as if he were a child. The tenderness in her voice was like a knife between my ribs. I couldn't remember the last time she'd spoken to me that way. I should probably go to the hospital just to be safe, Greg said, his voice a theatrical whisper that made my teeth clench. Always the center of attention. I'll drive you, Sarah immediately offered. We'll all go, Melissa added, not even glancing in my direction. I helped Greg to his feet, feeling the weight of him against my shoulder. He was heavier than he looked, solid and substantial in a way that made me aware of my own diminishing frame. Another reminder that life had moved on without me. As I steadied him, something fell from the pocket of his expensive jacket. It clattered to the floor, almost silent against the backdrop of concerned voices and movement. I instinctively reached down to retrieve it before anyone noticed. It was a driver's license, but as I glanced at it before slipping it into my palm, my blood ran cold. The name on the license wasn't Greg Mitchell. The face was his. Same confident smile, same clear blue eyes, but the name read Thomas Weston. And the address was in Ohio, not Massachusetts, where he claimed to have lived his entire life. I slipped the ID into my pocket without thinking, an automatic movement born of confusion rather than malice. In that moment of chaos, with paramedics arriving and my family clustered around their fallen hero, no one noticed my sleight of hand. No one saw the color drain from my face as I realized that the man who had stepped into my life, my home, my family, the man my daughter thought was twice the man I was, might be a complete stranger to us all. Later, as they all left for the hospital together, with Melissa calling over her shoulder, "We'll take it from here, Dad." I stood alone in the empty dining room, the half-eaten meal congealing on expensive china. I pulled out the driver's license and stared at it under the crystal chandelier that Sarah and I had bought on our 20th anniversary trip to Venice. The laminated card felt impossibly heavy in my weathered hands. With it came a realization that hit me harder than any heart attack. I held in my palm the power to destroy this man's carefully constructed facade, but using it might cost me the last fragile threads connecting me to my daughter. As I drove back to my apartment above Gino's Pizzeria, the smell of garlic and dough rising through the floorboards, I couldn't stop thinking about that silent moment when the ID had fallen. In that insignificant detail, in that whisper of plastic against hardwood, lay a secret that would change everything, though I didn't yet understand how deeply the deception ran, or how dangerous uncovering it would become. I returned to my apartment with that document hidden in my pocket. It felt like it was burning a hole through the fabric of my slacks, a dangerous secret pressing against my thigh with each step up the narrow staircase. The familiar scent of oregano and tomato sauce wafted up from Gino's downstairs, but tonight it made my stomach turn. My hands were trembling as I fumbled with the 3 locks I'd installed after someone broke into the building last winter. Once inside, I stood in the darkness for a moment, listening to the hum of the ancient refrigerator and the distant sounds of traffic on Main Street. My apartment was small enough that I could see every corner from the doorway. The fold-out couch still open from this morning, the kitchenette with its single burner stove, the bathroom door perpetually ajar because the frame had warped. This wasn't a home. It was a way station, a temporary shelter I'd somehow occupied for 8 months. I flicked on the light and pulled the driver's license from my pocket, studying it under the harsh fluorescent bulb. The name on the card didn't match what everyone knew. Thomas Weston, not Greg Mitchell. The address listed was in Columbus, Ohio, not the Boston suburb he claimed to have grown up in. But the photo was undeniably him. Same confident smile, same cleft chin, same cold eyes that seemed to be laughing at some private joke. More disturbing still, nestled beside that card was a small key I hadn't noticed before. It must have fallen out with the license. It was plain brass with a number etched into it, 247. It looked like it might belong to a storage locker or a train station deposit box. "Who are you really?" I whispered to the plastic card as if it might answer back. I sank onto the edge of my bed, my mind racing through the dinner's events again. The way Greg had carried himself with such confidence, dropping names of senators and celebrities as easily as discussing the weather. The expensive watch on his wrist that probably cost more than 3 months of my rent. The way Sarah looked at him, with that mixture of adoration and relief I recognized from the early days of our marriage. And then my daughter's words, sharp as razors. "Mom's new boyfriend is twice the man you are." The memory made me wince. Had she really meant it? Or was she just parroting what she'd been told? I tried to recall if there had been signs earlier. something in her emails or our brief phone conversations that might have hinted at this growing disdain. But the truth was, I'd been so caught up in survival mode, finding work, managing my health issues in secret, trying to maintain some dignity in the aftermath of the divorce, that I might have missed the subtle shifts in our relationship. I couldn't sleep that night. The couch springs dug into my back as I stared at the water stain on the ceiling that vaguely resembled the state of Texas. My thoughts cycled endlessly between the shock of my daughter's rejection and the mystery of the driver's license. By 3 a.m., I'd moved to my small kitchen table, the license and key laid out before me like pieces of a puzzle I couldn't solve. Dawn was breaking when my phone finally buzzed. It was a text from Melissa. "Greg's okay. They kept him overnight for observation. Thanks for your help, Dad." Cold and formal. No mention of her cruel words, no apology. Just a perfunctory acknowledgement that felt more like an obligation than gratitude. I typed and deleted several responses before settling on a simple, "Glad he's okay." What else could I say? By the way, your mother's boyfriend might be living under a false identity. She'd never believe me. She'd call it jealousy or desperation, an old man's pathetic attempt to sabotage her mother's happiness. And maybe part of it was jealousy, not of his relationship with Sarah. That wound had scarred over months ago, but of the way my daughter looked at him with admiration I once took for granted. Outside, the morning traffic began to build. Gino arrived downstairs to start prep for the day. His heavy footsteps and Italian curses a familiar soundtrack to my mornings. Life was continuing as normal for everyone else, while mine had splintered into a before and after around that dinner table. I showered and dressed mechanically, going through the motions of a normal day. But as I knotted my tie, still clinging to the habits of a career that no longer wanted me, I made a decision. I needed to know who Greg Mitchell really was. Not just for my sake or even for Sarah's, but for Melissa. Whatever he was hiding, whatever game he was playing, my daughter was now involved. And despite everything, despite her rejection and her cutting words, she was still my responsibility. She always would be. I slipped the license and key into my wallet. There was something else there too, something I'd almost forgotten about. A business card from an old client, Jeffrey Torres, who now worked as a private investigator. We'd stayed in loose contact over the years, occasionally meeting for coffee when he needed tax advice off the books. I dialed his number with hands that had finally stopped shaking, replaced by a cold resolve that felt foreign to my typically conflict-avoidant nature. "Jeff, it's Martin Reeves. I need your help with something sensitive." As I explained the situation, leaving out the more painful personal details, I stared at the driver's license on my kitchen table. Thomas Weston stared back, his eyes seeming to challenge me, even in the static photo. "Be careful, Marty," Jeff said after I finished. "If this guy is using false identification, he's not just playing house with your ex-wife. He's up to something else, something bigger. People don't change their names for innocent reasons." His words sent a chill through me, despite the morning sun now streaming through my single window. What had my family gotten involved with? And what would it cost all of us when the truth finally came to light? Because one thing I knew for certain, truths like these never stayed buried for long. And when they surfaced, they tended to take casualties with them. Jeff Torres didn't waste time. 3 days after our call, he slid a manila envelope across the table at Clayton's diner, a greasy spoon far enough from my usual haunts that I wouldn't run into anyone I knew. The coffee was bitter and thin, but it matched my mood as I stared at the envelope without touching it. "You sure you want to open that, Marty?" Jeff asked, his voice gravelly from decades of cigarettes. He'd aged since our accounting firm days. Salt and pepper beard, deep lines around his eyes, the slight paunch of a man who spent too many hours in cars on stakeouts. But his eyes were still sharp, missing nothing. "I have to," I replied, though my hand hesitated above the envelope. Outside rain battered the windows, turning the world beyond into a gray blur. It was fitting weather for what I suspected would be dark revelations. "Your boy's been busy," Jeff said, lighting a cigarette despite the no smoking sign. The waitress glared but didn't approach. She'd learned to pick her battles in a place like this, and not in a good way. I finally pulled the envelope toward me and opened it. Inside were photos, documents, and a typed report. The first photo showed Greg, or Thomas, or whatever his real name was, entering a nondescript building in Newark. The timestamp indicated it was 2 days ago, when he had told Sarah he was in New York for a business meeting. "He doesn't work where he says he does," Jeff explained unnecessarily. That investment firm he claims to be a partner at? They've never heard of a Greg Mitchell or a Thomas Weston. I flipped through more photos. Greg entering and exiting the building on different days, always looking over his shoulder first. Greg meeting with a heavy-set man in a parking garage. Greg arguing with someone whose face I couldn't see. "What is this place?" I asked, tapping the photo of the building. "Self-storage facility. Cheap place, pays by the month." I followed him inside once, but couldn't see which unit he accessed without blowing my cover. I pulled out the small key I'd taken the night of the dinner. "Unit 247, I murmured. Jeff raised an eyebrow. "Where'd you get that?" It fell from his pocket along with the fake ID. The same night I trailed off, not wanting to relive my daughter's words or the choking incident. "Well, that makes our job easier," Jeff said, reaching for the key. I pulled it back instinctively. "No," I said firmly. "I need to see for myself." Jeff sighed, rubbing his temple. "Marty, I'm telling you as a friend, not just as a PI. Let me handle this. If this guy is who I think he is based on my initial digging, he's dangerous. This isn't just some schmuck who's lying about his resume to impress your ex." But I couldn't let it go. I needed to know what kind of man my daughter admired so much, what kind of man had replaced me so easily in their lives. "I'll be careful," I promised, though the words sounded hollow even to my own ears. Jeff recognized the stubborn set of my jaw. He'd seen it often enough when we worked together. "Fine," he conceded. "But we go together, and we go tonight. Less chance of running into him or anyone else." I nodded, relief and dread mingling in my stomach. The waitress refilled our coffee cups, eyeing the envelope curiously. I closed it quickly, suddenly paranoid about who might be watching. "There's more," Jeff said once she'd moved away. I ran both names through some databases. Thomas Weston has a record, fraud charges in Ohio, identity theft in Pennsylvania. Nothing that stuck, but enough smoke to suggest a 5-alarm fire. And get this, there's a third name that popped. Richard Collins. Same physical description, same MO, active in Connecticut about 3 years ago. My mind flashed to Sarah and Melissa, sleeping peacefully in their beds, unaware of the predator in their midst. What's his game? What does he want from my family? Jeff shrugged, crushing out his cigarette in the remains of his eggs. Classic con man pattern. Finds vulnerable women, preferably with assets or good credit, works his way into their lives, then cleans them out. Sometimes it's a long con. He might stick around for a year or more, slowly siphoning funds, taking out loans in their names. By the time they realize what's happened, he's in another state with a new name. The image of Sarah, proud, capable Sarah, who had built her interior design business from nothing, reduced to financial ruin, made my chest ache despite everything that had happened between us. And Melissa, God, what would this do to her? She was just starting her career, already struggling with student loans. She couldn't afford this kind of catastrophe. "We have to stop him," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "That's why we're going tonight," Jeff agreed. "But Marty, you need to prepare yourself. Whatever we find in that storage unit, it won't be pretty. And when this all comes out, your family, they might not thank you for it. Shooting the messenger is a real thing in these situations." I knew he was right. I could already imagine Melissa's reaction. Her anger, her disbelief, her accusation that I was trying to ruin her mother's happiness out of spite. But I couldn't stand by and do nothing, even if it meant she would hate me more than she already did. That night, under cover of darkness and a persistent drizzle, Jeff and I pulled into the parking lot of the Newark storage depot. The place was deserted, lit only by flickering fluorescent lights that buzzed like angry insects. The key felt heavy in my pocket as we approached the main entrance, which was secured by a keypad. "I've got this," Jeff muttered, punching in a code that made the door click open. At my questioning look, he shrugged. "Former client owns the place. Owed me a favor." We moved through the facility like ghosts, our footsteps echoing on concrete floors. Unit 247 was on the second floor, at the end of a long hallway that smelled of dust and forgotten things. My hands trembled slightly as I inserted the key into the padlock. It turned smoothly, the lock falling open with a click that seemed too loud in the silent building. Jeff stood guard at the end of the hallway while I raised the metal door. The space beyond was dark. I fumbled for a light switch, found it, and blinked as harsh fluorescent light revealed the contents of the unit. It wasn't large, maybe 10 by 10 feet, but every inch was meticulously organized. Filing cabinets lined one wall, A desk with a laptop stood in the corner, and spread across a corkboard were newspaper clippings, photographs, and what looked like surveillance notes on my family. There, pinned at the center, was a photo of Sarah at her design studio taken with a telephoto lens. Beside it, financial documents, bank statements, investment portfolios, property assessments, all with her name highlighted in yellow. My blood ran cold as I realized the truth. We hadn't been random victims. Sarah had been targeted from the beginning. My daughter began to pull away from me even more. What had once been weekly lunch meetings became monthly, then sporadic text messages that felt obligatory rather than genuine. Each time I saw her, she seemed more distant, her eyes holding a coldness I'd never seen directed at me before. Our most recent visit at the coffee shop near her office had been particularly painful. "You look tired, Dad," she'd said. Not with concern, but with something like disappointment, as if my apparent exhaustion was just another way I'd failed to measure up. The truth was, I hadn't slept properly since discovering that storage unit 2 weeks ago. Jeff and I had documented everything we found: the multiple identities, the financial records on Sarah, the detailed timeline of how Greg had orchestrated their chance meeting at a charity auction last year. Nothing about their relationship was accidental. He'd studied her, learned her habits, her vulnerabilities, her financial worth, and he'd moved in with the precision of a surgeon. But how could I tell Melissa this without sounding like a desperate ex-husband trying to sabotage her mother's happiness? Especially when she was already pulling away from me, her sentences becoming shorter, her demeanor colder with each meeting. "I'm fine," I lied, stirring my coffee without drinking it. "How's work?" "Fine," she echoed, mimicking my evasiveness. Then, after a pause, she added, "Greg's been helping me with my investment portfolio. Did you know he managed funds for the Richardsons? As in, the Richardson Foundation?" Another name drop, another fiction. The dossier Jeff had compiled confirmed that Greg had never worked for any legitimate financial institution, let alone managed funds for a prestigious foundation. His expertise in finance came solely from studying how to defraud people of their money. "That's impressive," I managed, the words tasting like ash. "He says I've been too conservative with my savings," she continued, not noticing my discomfort, or perhaps not caring. "He's helping me diversify into some higher yield opportunities." Warning bells clanged in my head. This was how it started. Small investments at first, building trust, then larger sums until there was nothing left. I'd seen the pattern documented in the storage unit. Newspaper clippings about his previous victims. Women who'd lost everything from retirement savings to family homes. "Melissa," I began carefully, "investment advice is tricky. It might be good to get a second opinion from a certified financial planner before making any significant changes." Her expression hardened immediately. "You think I can't make my own decisions, or that Greg doesn't know what he's talking about? That's not what It's exactly what you meant." She cut me off. "You're bitter, Dad. You're bitter about Mom moving on, bitter about your career ending, bitter about your life, and now you can't stand to see us happy." Each word was a precision strike, hitting vulnerabilities I didn't know were so visible. Was I that transparent? That pathetic? "I just want what's best for you," I said softly. "What's best for me," she replied, gathering her things, "is not having to listen to you try to undermine the positive relationships in my life. Greg was right about you." And there it was, the source of the poison. What exactly did Greg say about me? She hesitated, perhaps realizing she'd revealed too much. "Nothing that isn't obvious to everyone," she finally said. "That you never got over the divorce. That you're trying to sabotage Mom's chance at happiness because you can't find your own." I wanted to laugh at the irony, the con man accusing me of sabotage, but the laughter died in my throat when I saw the conviction in my daughter's eyes. She truly believed him. Worse, she was repeating his words as if they were gospel truth. "I love you, Melissa," I said, because it was the only truth that mattered. "Love isn't enough, Dad," she replied, standing up. "Not when it comes with so many strings attached." She left without a proper goodbye, her coffee half finished on the table between us. I sat there long after she'd gone, watching the steam dissipate until the liquid was as cold as the space she'd left behind. That same evening, as I was reviewing the evidence Jeff and I had gathered, my doorbell rang, a rare occurrence that made me instantly wary. When I peered through the peephole, my heart skipped a beat. Greg stood in the hallway alone, hands in the pockets of his expensive overcoat. For a moment, I considered not answering, But curiosity, or perhaps some self-destructive impulse, made me open the door. "Martin," he greeted me with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "May I come in?" Every instinct screamed danger, but I stepped aside, letting him enter my small apartment. His gaze swept the space, taking in the fold-out couch, the stack of job applications on the table, the single unwashed coffee mug in the sink. I saw my life through his eyes and felt a fresh wave of shame. "Nice place," he lied, in the same tone someone might use to comfort a terminal patient. "What do you want?" I asked, not bothering with pleasantries. He moved to my window, looking down at the street as if checking for something or someone. "I wanted to thank you properly," he said, "for saving my life at dinner. It was quite dramatic. Anyone would have done the same." I repeated the line I'd used that night. He turned, fixing me with a gaze that was suddenly predatory. "But not everyone did they? Only you, the hero." He said the last word with a subtle sneer. Must have felt good, being the center of attention again, even for a moment. I said nothing, watching him carefully. He was circling my small living area now, picking up a framed photo of Melissa from her college graduation. "She looks like her mother," he observed. "Same eyes, same determination." He set the photo down carelessly, nearly toppling it. "Same vulnerability to disappointment." The implied threat wasn't subtle. "What do you really want, Greg?" I asked, emphasizing his false name slightly. Something flickered in his expression, a momentary crack in the facade. He knew. Somehow he knew I'd discovered his secret. "I want you to understand your place in this new family dynamic," he said, his voice soft but menacing. "You had your chance with Sarah. You failed. You had your chance to be the father Melissa needed. You failed there too. Now it's my turn, and I won't fail, because you're twice the man I am." I echoed my daughter's cruel words, unable to keep the bitterness from my voice. He smiled then, a genuine smile that chilled me more than his threats. "She came up with that on her own, you know. I never had to suggest it. That's the beauty of what I do, Martin. I don't have to destroy families. They're already broken. I just rearrange the pieces to my advantage." He moved toward the door, then paused with his hand on the knob. "Stay away from Sarah and Melissa. Whatever you think you know, whatever evidence you think you have, they won't believe you. They'll see exactly what I want them to see. A bitter old man trying to poison their happiness." After he left, I stood in the center of my apartment, heart pounding in my chest. The familiar pressure was building behind my sternum again, that warning sign my cardiologist had told me to monitor. But right now, my physical health was the least of my concerns. He knew I was investigating him, and he was confident enough to threaten me directly. Whatever his plans were for Sarah and Melissa, they must be nearing completion. We were running out of time. A phone call changed everything on a rainy Tuesday morning in November. I was shuffling through the thin stack of mail that constituted my social life these days. Bills, credit card offers for people who didn't know how desperate my finances had become, and a postcard from my sister in Arizona, who still believed I was living the successful accountant life. The cheap burner phone Jeff had insisted I use for our investigation buzzed against the kitchen counter, an unfamiliar number lighting up the screen. "Hello?" I answered cautiously, expecting perhaps a telemarketer or wrong number. "Is this Martin Reeves?" The woman's voice was soft but tense, with a slight southern accent I couldn't place. "Who's asking?" A pause filled with the static of what sounded like a long-distance connection. "My name is Eleanor Weston. I think you might know my husband." My blood ran cold. Weston, the name on the driver's license. Thomas Weston. I sank into my kitchen chair, suddenly lightheaded. "How did you get this number?" I managed to ask. "I found it written on a paper in one of Tom's storage units in Newark," she explained. "I've been tracking him for nearly a year. The manager let me in when I showed him our marriage certificate and Tom's ID. There were files in there about you and your family." The room seemed to tilt around me. I gripped the edge of the table to steady myself. "You're saying you're married to the man who calls himself Greg Mitchell?" "Yes," she confirmed, her voice breaking slightly. "Though when I knew him, he was Thomas Weston. Before that, he was Richard Collins in Connecticut and David Mercer in Virginia. He has a pattern." My mind was racing, connecting dots that had been floating just beyond my grasp. The storage unit, the false identities, his confidence that Sarah and Melissa wouldn't believe me. It all pointed to a man who had done this before, many times, with devastating effectiveness. "Mrs. Weston." "Eleanor, please," she interrupted. "I haven't been Mrs. Weston in reality for a long time, even if the paperwork says otherwise." "Eleanor," I corrected myself. "I think you should know that this man is involved with my ex-wife. He's close to my family." She let out a bitter laugh that contained no humor. "Of course he is. He always finds families. Preferably ones with some money, some status. Ones with fractures he can exploit." Her words echoed Greg's own, about rearranging broken pieces to his advantage. "What exactly does he do?" I asked, though I feared I already knew the answer. "He takes everything," she said simply. "Money, property, identity, dignity. He's a human wrecking ball dressed in custom suits and charm." By the time I realized what was happening, he had drained our accounts, maxed out credit cards in my name, and taken out loans using my family's property as collateral. He left me with nearly $500,000 in debt and a ruined reputation. My stomach clenched as I thought of Sarah's business, the house I still partially owned, Melissa's fledgling investment portfolio that Greg had been helping with. How far had his scheme already progressed? "I need to warn them," I said, more to myself than to Eleanor. "They won't believe you," she replied, an echo of Greg's threat. "I tried to warn the woman after me, a widow in Pennsylvania. She called the police on me, said I was harassing her. By the time she realized I was telling the truth, he had already disappeared with her late husband's life insurance money." The hopelessness in her voice mirrored my own despair. How could I protect my family from a man they trusted more than me? "Why are you calling me now?" I asked. "Because I'm close to finding him," she said, a new determination entering her voice. "I've been tracking him for months, following the pattern of his previous identities. When I found your name and number in that storage unit, I knew he was planning his next move. And from the financial documents I saw there, it's going to be soon. He never stays in one place longer than 18 months. He's been with your ex-wife for how long?" "Almost a year," I replied, my mouth dry. "Then you don't have much time. Once he has what he wants, he'll disappear. And trust me, Mr. Reeves, the wreckage he leaves behind isn't just financial. The psychological damage, it's something nobody should have to endure." I thought of Melissa's face at that dinner, the way she'd looked at Greg with admiration and at me with disdain. The aftermath of his con would destroy her already fragile trust in relationships. And Sarah, proud, independent Sarah, would be devastated by the betrayal, by her own vulnerability to such manipulation. "What are you suggesting we do?" I asked, running a hand through my thinning hair. "Meet me," she said firmly. "I have documentation, police reports, financial records, testimonies from his other victims, things his targets never get to see until it's too late. Together, we might stand a chance of being believed." We arranged to meet the following day at a hotel in Trenton, neutral ground, away from the possibility of being seen by Greg or anyone who knew him. As I hung up, my hands were shaking, not with fear but with a strange sense of validation. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't just a bitter ex-husband. The threat was real, and now I had an ally. I called Jeff immediately, filling him in on the unexpected development. "Be careful, Marty," he warned. "This could be a setup. Greg might have discovered we accessed his storage unit. This wife could be working with him." I hadn't considered that possibility. What should I do? Go to the meeting, but I'll be there too, watching from a distance. We can't afford to miss this opportunity if she's legitimate, but we also can't walk blindly into a trap. That night, I barely slept. The face of Eleanor Weston, a woman I'd never seen, haunted my imagination. What did a person look like after being systematically destroyed by someone they loved? Would I recognize the same devastation in Sarah's face 6 months from now? In Melissa's? The thought of my daughter's bright future being derailed by this predator made my chest tighten painfully. The pressure behind my sternum returned, stronger than before, accompanied by a tingling sensation down my left arm. Warning signs my doctor had been clear about, but medical concerns would have to wait. My family's survival was at stake. As dawn broke over the horizon, I stood at my window watching the neighborhood come to life. The baker opening his shop across the street, the mail carrier beginning her rounds, a mother walking her children to the bus stop. Normal lives untouched by the kind of calculated evil that had infiltrated mine. I envied their oblivious contentment, their routine security. Today would determine whether I could save my family from a fate they didn't even know awaited them, or whether I would lose them forever to a man who saw them as nothing more than a means to an end. Either way, after today, nothing would ever be the same. Eleanor Weston looked nothing like I had imagined. When she walked into the hotel lobby in Trenton, I almost missed her. A small woman with chestnut hair cut in a practical bob, wearing a navy pantsuit that hung slightly loose on her frame. She carried a weathered leather briefcase that she clutched like a lifeline. But it was her eyes that caught my attention, deep brown and haunted by a vigilance that comes only from profound betrayal. They darted around the space, assessing exits, studying faces, the eyes of prey that had learned to survive. "Mr. Reeves?" she asked, approaching my corner table with cautious steps. I stood, offering my hand. "Martin, please. Thank you for coming, Eleanor." Her handshake was firmer than I expected. Up close, I could see the fine lines around her eyes, the slight tremor in her hands that she tried to hide by gripping her briefcase. She looked both older and younger than her probable 40 years, aged by stress yet energized by purpose. "I wasn't sure you'd come," she admitted as we sat down. "Most people don't want to hear what I have to say. It's easier to believe I'm a vindictive ex than to accept that they've been targeted by a professional predator." "I've seen his storage unit," I reminded her. "I know this isn't a misunderstanding or a coincidence." She nodded, some of the tension leaving her shoulders. "Then you're already ahead of where I was when it all fell apart." She opened her briefcase and withdrew a thick folder. "These are copies. Originals are in a safety deposit box with instructions to be sent to the FBI if anything happens to me." The paranoia in her statement didn't seem excessive once I began to look through the documents. Police reports spanning 5 states, financial records showing systematic theft and fraud, photographs of Greg with different women, always positioned beside symbols of wealth, expensive homes, luxury cars, boats, and most disturbing, surveillance photos of him meeting with known criminals, exchanging documents, money changing hands. "He's not just a con man," I realized aloud. "This is organized. He's part of a network," Eleanor confirmed, her voice dropping. "They target specific types of victims, share information, create elaborate backstories for each other. That's why he's so convincing. Because parts of his story are true, just not about him. The Harvard degree he claims belonged to one of his associates. The investment experience, scripted based on information from actual financial advisors in their network. I thought of how seamlessly Greg had inserted himself into our lives, how perfectly his persona had complemented Sarah's insecurities after our divorce. It hadn't been lucky timing. It had been calculated precision. "How did you escape?" I asked, studying a particularly damning bank statement showing transfers of nearly $300,000 from Eleanor's accounts to offshore holdings. A shadow crossed her face. "I didn't. Not really. He left me when there was nothing left to take. I was a husk by then. Suicidal. It was actually a detective investigating another of his victims who found me. Detective Diana Martinez from Virginia. She's been building a case against him and his network for years, but they're careful. They stay just under federal jurisdiction thresholds, change identities frequently, target victims who are too ashamed to come forward. And now you help track him," I said, understanding her mission. She nodded. "It's the only way I can make sense of what happened to me. The only way I can sleep at night knowing he's still out there doing this to other families." I reached across the table impulsively, covering her trembling hand with mine. "We're going to stop him, Eleanor, before he does to my family what he did to you." The sudden ringing of a phone made us both jump. It was mine, Sarah's number flashing on the screen. I hesitated, then answered. "Martin?" Her voice was tight with forced pleasantry. "We're having a small dinner party tonight. Melissa insisted you be invited. Can you come?" My eyes met Eleanor's across the table. A dinner party, a public setting, witnesses. It could be the perfect opportunity. "I'll be there," I promised, adding, "Is there anything I can bring?" "Just yourself," Sarah replied with an awkward laugh. "Greg is handling everything else." "I'm sure he is," I thought bitterly. After ending the call, I turned to Eleanor. "Tonight. We'll confront him tonight." Her eyes widened. "That's too soon. We need a solid plan. Contingencies." "We don't have time," I interrupted. "He knows we're onto him. The visit to my apartment, this sudden dinner invitation, he's accelerating his timeline. Whatever he's planning to take from my family, he's going to do it soon." She bit her lip, considering. "If we mess this up, they'll never believe us. We'll lose our only chance." "I'm already losing them," I said. the pain of my daughter's rejection still fresh. Every day he spends poisoning them against me is another day they're vulnerable to whatever he's planning. After further discussion, we formulated a rough plan. Eleanor would wait outside in her car with all the evidence. I would go in alone, assess the situation, and if the moment was right, call her in. Jeff would be stationed nearby as backup, ready to intervene if things went sideways. It wasn't foolproof, but it was the best we could do on short notice. As we parted ways in the hotel parking lot, Eleanor gripped my arm with surprising strength. "Be careful," she warned. "When cornered, men like him become dangerous. They'd rather destroy everything than lose control." That evening, I found myself once again approaching Sarah's house, our former home, with a sense of foreboding. The familiar Tudor-style residence was lit up against the early darkness of November, shadows of guests moving behind curtained windows. I straightened my tie, checked that my phone was fully charged, and patted my pocket where I'd placed key pieces of evidence, just enough to crack Greg's facade without overwhelming everyone with the full horror of his crimes. My finger hovered over the doorbell for a moment as I steeled myself for what was to come. Then I pressed it, hearing the familiar chime echo through the house that had once been mine. Sarah opened the door, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "Martin, thank you for coming," she said, her voice formal as if greeting a stranger. "Everyone's in the dining room." I followed her through the foyer, past photographs that had once included me but now showcased her new life with Greg. The dining room table was set with our best china, wedding gifts that had survived the division of assets. Around it sat several couples I recognized from our social circle, along with Melissa, and at the head of the table, Greg. He didn't look surprised to see me. In fact, he smiled broadly, rising to extend his hand as if we were old friends. "Martin, glad you could join us." In that moment, as his eyes met mine with calculated warmth, I knew with absolute certainty that this man would destroy everything I loved unless I stopped him tonight, whatever the cost to myself. I never fully recovered the unconditional love my daughter once had for me. The relationship we rebuilt after that fateful dinner party was different, tempered by wariness, by the understanding that truth can be more devastating than the most elaborate lie. Even now, 5 years later, when Melissa visits my small house in Trenton with her husband and their new baby, I can see a shadow cross her face sometimes, a memory of disillusionment that never completely faded. She respects me now. She values my advice, calls me when she's troubled, includes me in her life's important moments. But there's an invisible barrier between us, a thin wall of scar tissue formed around the wound of that night. Sometimes I think that, deep down, she would have preferred to continue believing the lie than to accept the truth about a father she had judged as weak. The dinner party had started normally enough. Polite conversation, expensive wine, the gentle clink of silver against china. I'd taken the empty seat at the far end of the table, directly opposite Greg, who held court with stories that made everyone laugh. Stories I now knew were stolen from other people's lives, crafted to build the persona of success he had so carefully constructed. "Greg was just telling us about the charity project he's launching," Sarah explained, her hand resting possessively on his arm. "A foundation to support single mothers returning to the workforce." The irony was almost unbearable. This predator positioning himself as a savior of vulnerable women. But I forced a smile, biding my time, waiting for the right moment. Eleanor was parked down the street, our evidence organized and ready. Jeff was stationed at a coffee shop nearby, monitoring his phone for my signal. "That sounds impressive," I managed, taking a sip of water to calm my racing heart. "What sparked your interest in that particular cause, Greg?" His eyes locked with mine, a flicker of challenge visible only to me. "I believe in second chances, Martin, in helping people rebuild after life has knocked them down." The couple seated beside me, the Hendersons, old friends from our country club days, nodded appreciatively. "So refreshing to see someone from the financial sector giving back," Richard Henderson commented. Dinner progressed with excruciating slowness. I picked at my food, stomach too knotted with anxiety to eat. Across the table, Melissa kept shooting me concerned glances, perhaps wondering why I was so quiet. Greg, meanwhile, grew more animated, more charming with each passing minute, as if feeding off my discomfort. Finally, as Sarah brought out dessert, her famous tiramisu, my favorite once, I felt my phone vibrate in my pocket. A text from Eleanor. "Police contact confirms transfer of $850K from Sarah's business account this morning." Moving to offshore account. Acting today. My blood ran cold. He wasn't waiting any longer. The theft had already begun. I stood up suddenly, my chair scraping loudly against the hardwood floor. All eyes turned to me. "Martin, are you all right?" Sarah asked, her forehead creasing with reluctant concern. "Actually, no," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "I'm not all right with watching a con man steal everything you've worked for." The room went utterly silent. Greg's smile faltered for just a moment before returning, broader and more sympathetic than before. "Martin," he said gently, as if addressing someone suffering from dementia, "I think you might be having some kind of episode. Should we call someone for you?" "That won't be necessary," I replied, pulling the driver's license from my pocket and placing it on the table. "Thomas Weston." The color drained from Greg's face so quickly it was as if someone had pulled a plug. Before he could recover, I added the key to the storage unit beside it. Unit 247, Newark Storage Depot, full of interesting reading material about Sarah's finances, her business, her property holdings, all meticulously researched before you accidentally bumped into her at the charity auction last year. Melissa jumped to her feet. "Dad, stop this, you're embarrassing yourself." Her voice cracked with anger and what might have been fear that I was right, that her judgment had been so catastrophically wrong. "Your father is clearly unwell," Greg interjected smoothly, recovering his composure. "Martin, these paranoid delusions, they're not delusions," I interrupted, dialing Eleanor's number and putting it on speaker. "And I'm not alone in knowing exactly who and what you are." When Greg's phone rang at that precise moment, the coincidence made several guests gasp. He glanced at the screen, and for the first time, real alarm flashed across his features. "Aren't you going to answer that?" I asked. "I believe it's your wife calling." The stunned silence that followed was broken by Sarah's confused voice. "His wife?" The front door opened then. I had texted Eleanor the entry code, and she walked in, her small frame somehow commanding the room instantly. Her eyes fixed on Greg with the intensity of someone who had crossed continents for this confrontation. "Hello, Thomas," she said quietly. "Or is it Greg now? I've lost track of your names." What followed was chaos. Greg denied everything at first, then tried to flee when Eleanor began distributing copies of bank records showing his systematic theft from previous victims. Sarah went from disbelief to rage to collapse in the space of 20 minutes. The Hendersons called the police. Melissa screamed at me, accusing me of orchestrating this humiliation out of jealousy. But it was when the doorbell rang again that the final mask fell. Detective Diana Martinez stood on the threshold, flanked by 2 officers. And behind them, a woman I didn't recognize, holding the hands of 2 small children who looked at Greg with a mixture of confusion and hope. "Daddy?" the smaller child called out. In that moment of reckoning, as multiple lives he had shattered converged in one room, Greg finally abandoned pretense. He attempted to escape through the back door, only to be tackled by Jeff, who had been monitoring the situation from the garden. The aftermath was a blur of police statements, tears, and recriminations. Sarah discovered that nearly $1 million had been siphoned from her accounts that very morning. The paperwork authorizing the transfers bore her signature, forged so expertly that only a handwriting analyst could identify the fraud. Without our intervention, she would have been financially ruined within days. Melissa didn't speak to me for 6 months afterward. The shame of her words at that first dinner, "Twice the man you are," haunted her too deeply to face me. When she finally came to my apartment on a rainy April evening, her eyes were red-rimmed from crying. "How did you know?" she asked simply. "When all of us were fooled, how did you see through him?" I could have said many things in that moment. I could have pointed to my years of experience spotting financial irregularities as an accountant. I could have mentioned the driver's license, the storage unit, Eleanor's testimony. But the truth was simpler and more painful. "Because I loved you too much to let anyone hurt you," I told her, "even if it meant you would hate me for it." Now as I watch her cradle my grandson in the living room of my modest home, I know that I made the right choice. The Greg Mitchells of the world prey on our deepest vulnerabilities, our loneliness, our insecurities, our desire to believe that happiness can arrive packaged in perfect form. They exploit the fractures in families, widening cracks until the foundation crumbles. Sarah rebuilt her business slowly. We never rekindled our relationship. Too much damage had been done before Greg ever entered our lives. But we found a way to be civil, even friendly at times. She's seeing someone new now, a kind-hearted high school teacher with no investment expertise whatsoever. As for me, I've learned to live with the knowledge that sometimes being a father means choosing to be hated in order to save the ones you love. It's not the role I would have chosen, but it's the one that has defined my life's greatest purpose. Today, when I walk alone through the streets of Trenton, I silently repeat the phrase that has become my personal mantra. It's better to be forgotten with dignity than remembered through lies. And on the days when Melissa calls just to check in, or brings my grandson for an unexpected visit, I know that while I may not have regained all that was lost, I saved what mattered most. Sometimes that has to be enough. As Martin's story comes to a close, I wonder, what would you have done in his position? Would you have had the courage to stand up for the truth when everyone, including your own child, was determined to believe the lie? Sometimes love means being willing to be hated, to be the villain in someone else's story, if that's what it takes to protect them from harm they cannot see. The hardest battles we fight aren't against obvious enemies, but against the charming deceivers who exploit our deepest vulnerabilities, our loneliness, our desire to believe that happiness can arrive in perfect packaging. Martin lost his family long before Greg arrived, but in the act of saving them, he found something perhaps more valuable: the quiet dignity of knowing he did what was right, even when it broke his heart. If this story touched you, please follow this channel for more tales of human courage, family, and the complicated truths that define our lives. Like and share this video with someone who might need to hear that sometimes. Being forgotten with dignity is better than being remembered through lies. The most important relationships in our lives are worth fighting for, even when the battle seems already lost.